In a library known for its difficulty, these titles are said to be the toughest games the NES has to offer. But you can't believe everything you hear. Let's find out if these games truly are NES-Hard. I have absolutely no experience with this game. I never played it as a kid, and none of my friends owned it or talked about it either. But apparently a lot of people have played this one because this is the 5th most popular title on this list. To be honest, I probably wouldn't know about this game at all if it weren't for a certain video from a certain angry video game guy. Everything I know about this game comes from that video, so at this point, all I know is that it's basically a shooter like Life Force, and that it's ludicrously, savagely difficult. Now, I do generally like games from the shooter genre. However, I'm not so much a fan of unfair, infuriating games. So in all my years of collecting, I've never seen the need to add Silver Surfer to my collection. Until now. Special shout out to eBay seller Bella is as we some. Not only did you have the cheapest copy of this game on eBay, it was also in better condition than nearly every other copy in this price range. So thanks again. Now, I had originally planned to hold off on this game until I reached the end of this list, kind of like what I'm probably going to end up doing with these games. But I'm honestly kind of excited to try this one out because it's the only game on this list that I've never played. I'm just not expecting to have a very good time. Crikey, that is some European music! Who made this game? Software Creations Limited. Now let's see where these guys are from. Damn, I'm good. And so is this music. Now, I usually don't care for British retro game music. It's a little too squealy for my taste. But this soundtrack kicks ass. Well, what do you think, Paco? You want to give it a try? Alright. Okay, well, I don't know who any of these people are. Although my knowledge of the Marvel roster is pretty much limited to movies and video games, not the comics or cartoons. This guy looks like a green Thanos, but I'm assuming he's one of the green guys from Captain Marvel, which I've never seen. Now, the game clearly wants me to start with this lizard guy, though, so, here we go. So I can see why people have a hard time with this game. Every stage has tons of enemies and projectiles flying around, usually in some kind of wavy or swirly pattern that's hard to avoid. Contact with any of these or any surface in the level will kill you immediately. The stages themselves are pretty elaborately designed with lots of details. Pretty to look at, sure, but it isn't immediately obvious which parts of the level are just stage dressing and which parts present an actual threat. Now, this is actually pretty standard fare for the genre, but in most shooters I've played, you control a tiny little ship with a tiny little hitbox, making it easier to weave around stage hazards, in theory. But Silver Surfer is a huge character with an equally huge hitbox. This is most obvious in the top-down stages, where your sprite seems to double in length, and this is of course where the game most often goes out of its way to make you thread the needle. Also, all the enemies in this game are complete bullet sponges. There are power-ups you can collect to upgrade the power of your shot, as well as these little orbs which are basically like the options in Gradius. You could also collect up to 5 of these screen-clearing bombs, which you can activate by pressing the select button. But even with a fully upgraded arsenal, nearly every enemy in the game takes multiple hits to destroy, and they usually come at you in waves of half a dozen or more, one after the other. And when you die, you lose everything, which effectively renders you weaker than even the lowliest grunt enemy in the game. Every death is accompanied by a drawn-out cutscene to really drive home the fact that you have failed miserably, and then you restart the level from the beginning, unless you've managed to make it to one of the stage's checkpoints. And this last bit is a bit more personal, as not everyone will agree, but personally I hate it when games like this use checkpoints. It doesn't really feel like you've made any progress when you are forced to start halfway through the stage with none of your upgrades. I'd much rather start the level over from the beginning so I can recollect all those power-ups again. Now, in researching games for this series, I spent quite a bit of time paging through video game forums and various fan sites. I lost count of how many lists I read through. But I can tell you that Silver Surfer was one of the most common titles to be mentioned on any of these lists. In some cases, it actually topped the list. Oddly enough, you know what games I never saw mentioned? Gradius, Abadox, Life Force. All three of these games feature one-hit deaths. All three of them throw waves of fast-moving enemies at you, and in each game, contact with any surface in the level is fatal. And yet, despite the fact that all of those games use basically the same play mechanics and follow the same rules as Silver Surfer, and that at least two of them are arguably more well-known, I didn't find a single person who thought to mention any of them when they're listing the hardest games on the NES. These omissions are all the more peculiar when you consider that Silver Surfer is not nearly as difficult as those three games. As a matter of fact, Silver Surfer is not an especially hard game at all.
I don't think that's funny at all.
Thanks, Quint. Well, as long as you're here, you might as well tell everyone to like and subscribe. Oh, there he goes. That was kind of weird. Did you know he was over there? I didn't, though. I was very careful about that. I said, I can see why people have a hard time with this game. I never once said that I thought it was hard. Right, but I get it. I was convinced by his video too, remember? Seriously though, am I missing something? Within just a few hours of starting this game up for the first time, I was at a point where I could consistently complete any one of these first 5 stages, sometimes without even dying. And yes, there were many, many deaths to get to that point. But shouldn't you expect to see the game over screen a few times when you are learning to play a new game? I know everyone has their own definition of what constitutes an acceptable degree of challenge, but I think most people would agree that a victory that does not feel earned pretty much sucks. Besides, everything that makes this game difficult could apply to any number of games, including just about every shooter I have ever played. So I'm not sure why everyone is so hung up on this game in particular, but I could hazard a guess. But you know what? I don't want to talk about him anymore. Let's take a look at what some other people have to say about Silver Surfer. I'm sure we'll find some insight there.
The game was so cheap in its poor design, it became a legend in its difficulty on the console. The image you see after losing a life will be one to remember for a very long time.
Gosh, that sounds familiar. Where have I heard that before?
The difficulty is legendary. This image will be burned in your retina.
Just about everything, even the level structures, can kill you. One hit kills you. The enemies come flying in swarms at ridiculous velocities.
If you touch any walls, ceilings, grounds, or anything in this game, you die.
People seem to keep harping on this point, as if this was some radical form of cruelty invented and used solely by this game. Again, has no one else played Life Force? I've always thought that was a pretty popular game.
The game is beatable. It just takes some extreme skill to better the various levels and take down the bosses. Something only the best players of the game have managed to do.
There is not a single person in the world who beat this game, so the difficulty is indeed legendary.
Okay, dude, settle down. It's a hard game, we get it. He does bring up a fair point though. Is it entirely possible that I'm just really good at video games? Look, anyone who knows me will tell you that modesty has never really been one of my issues. But when it comes to video games, and I say this with absolute sincerity, I believe that anything I can do can be accomplished by another person. If you have some way of seeing the television and some sort of appendage that allows you to hold and manipulate a game controller, then as far as I'm concerned, you and I are on equal ground. The only thing I would say differentiates me from the average person is that I might have an inordinate amount of patience for games like this. I'm not very easily discouraged, even in the face of repeated failure. So just because I do stuff like slap the couch, throw stuff at the cat, or use colorful language like bitch ass motherfucker, I'm not necessarily even close to losing my patience. I'm just really into the game. Now indulge me for a moment longer because I was surprised by how much I enjoyed this game, and I want to tell you why. First of all, look at all these enemies flying around. You got these guys and these guys, all my bullets, and the entire stage is scrolling to the left, and hardly any sprite flicker or noticeable slowdown. Now, I'm not exactly sure what the significance of that is on a technical level, but as far as I'm concerned, that's an indication of Top Gun programming. Every level is unique and interesting to look at, with all kinds of memorable details like these dinosaur-filled jungles, busted-up statues, crazy faces, and I don't even know, but that's awesome. These levels are alive with vibrant colors that just pop. Every stage also presents an entirely unique menagerie of enemies, like these rocket pack lizards in Reptile stage and these ghosts in Mephisto stage. My favorite enemies are by far these jack-o'-lanterns in Firelord stage. Someone let me know in the comments if these guys are canon, because they are great, especially this guy. The icing on this cake is the awesome soundtrack, which I've already mentioned. It's a shame that there are really only 2 tracks that just alternate back and forth throughout the game. I would have preferred for each stage to have its own unique music, but that's a pretty minimal complaint. So what we have here is a highly competent, almost lovingly crafted game with better than average graphics, music, and controls. So what's the problem? I guess what turns people off is that it leans pretty heavily on gotcha moments. It's virtually impossible to survive any of these stages without prior knowledge of enemy spawn points and level mechanics. And it's also kind of a bummer that you lose all your upgrades when you die, so don't do that. This is easier than you think because the timing and rhythm of these stages is very, very consistent. With very few exceptions, every enemy and stage hazard appears at the same place every time, and they always move and behave the same way. By the way, the crux of my entire argument about this game's exaggerated difficulty hinges on your ability to remember these elements on your 2nd, 5th, or 20th trip through these stages. Basically, if you were able to beat any of the bosses in Cuphead, there's really no reason why you can't beat Silver Surfer. But here are some strategies that I learned while playing the game. Let's start with the stage select screen. Just like Mega Man, you can choose to beat these first 5 stages in any order you want. None of these stages is necessarily any harder than any of the others. However, I've found that Reptile stage and Emperor stage are the best ones to start with. Either of these 2 stages provide the fastest route to a full arsenal. Conversely, I'd say that Mephisto stage and Possessor stage are the worst ones to start with because each of these open up with swarms of fast-moving enemies. I tend to change up the order of the stages every time I play through the game, but I invariably start the chain with either Emperor or Reptile, and then end with the other one. That way, in case I bite it at any point in the other stages, I still have that safety net of one of the easy levels to collect all the power-ups again before I enter the 6th and final stage. First of all, there's just the blanket strategy of shoot everything. Anticipate when and where each wave of enemies is going to appear on screen and be waiting for them. The first section of Emperor stage gives you that handy grid background, so you can preemptively line yourself up with the turrets, cannons, and tanks and take them out before they become a problem. You can find your first orb here, and almost immediately after, shoot this spaceship before it takes off to collect the second one. Also, this tank will give you a bomb. By the end of this first section, you should be pretty much completely powered up. Now, section 2 is pretty straightforward and not too taxing. Hurry up and collect this bomb before it disappears, and this enemy will drop an orb if you need it. Emperor himself is pretty easy. The best strategy for him and pretty much all the bosses in the game is to be aggressive and get right up in their face. Most of them go down pretty quickly. Mephisto and Possessor stages are the ones that usually give me the most trouble, so I usually get them out of the way next. These swirling patterns are pretty intimidating, but these enemies follow the same paths every time, so in theory, you can get through these opening sections without firing a single shot. Also, be careful with these bat and baton enemies. Just because they've gone off the screen doesn't mean they're gone. Now, these stupid hands are one of the few random elements in the game. They don't seem to follow any regular timing or pattern, so I usually just hang back until the full section has scrolled into the screen, and then charge through it as fast as I can. It usually works out. I don't know what these things are, but it's safe to blast through the first wave. But just weave around the next 3 enemies though. They will explode into smaller projectiles if you shoot them. Now, the first wave of enemies you encounter in Possessor stage will drop a speed upgrade. You have several opportunities to collect these throughout the game, but I honestly don't think they're that important. The control is good and responsive enough from the beginning that I just felt that the extra boost of sensitivity was more of a liability than anything else. Now, I didn't mention this earlier, but once you have at least one of the orbs equipped, you can angle its shot in one of 3 directions. It's not too often that I found it useful to aim in any direction other than straight ahead, but being able to aim downward makes getting by these enemies much easier. Oh, and by the way, at this point it probably goes without saying, but if there's any doubt as to what stage elements do and don't pose a threat to you, pay attention to your shots. If they can't pass through something, you can't either. In the second section, I find it safest just to come right up through the middle of the screen. A couple of these guys will take shots at you, so be careful. And this eyeball thing will drop an orb. The best place to be for most of the stage is at the bottom of the screen, otherwise these eyeballs might warp in right on top of you. And there's another orb right here if you're quick. The first section of Firelord stage is not nearly as difficult as it looks. It seems like your passage through these narrow channels is blocked by these grabbing hands, but this is pretty much trivialized if you have an orb power-up or 2. All you have to do is... Well, crap. You know what? That's fine. Now I can show you that it's easy enough to get by those hands by just waiting for them to retract back into the water. Or lava. Or mud. I don't know what that stuff is. They only have a hitbox when they are fully extended. This wave of Wraith enemies will drop a power-up and a bomb, and this last hand on the left will drop a 1-up. Here's another infamously difficult section. I'll admit that I died quite a few times in my early attempts to get through the stage. However, it didn't really take me too long to figure out that if you just hug the right side of the screen, none of these pumpkins will touch you. These damn pumpkins are one of the few unpredictable elements in this entire game, and they remain a threat during the duration of the stage. Although, where they jump from is the same every time, when they jump is totally random. There are 2 pumpkins waiting for you in this spot. It's suicide to try to get through here before they have both jumped up. Okay, there's one, now wait for the second. Wait for it. Huh, I guess he's not coming. Oh, there he is. Oh, remember those bombs we've been collecting? You might want to use one here. It's possible to squeeze through these little drips of fire, but it's a lot easier to just, This bat will drop an orb if you need it. A pumpkin will jump up between each of these fire-dropping statues. The safest strategy is just to hang back against the left side of the screen, moving forward only after each pumpkin has appeared. During the lead up to Firelord, you'll come to the screen where you have to survive an onslaught of these fire enemies. If you still have an orb, it's safe to just hang out here on the side of the screen and just fire continuously. None of these guys will be able to touch you. If you don't have any of the upgrades, however, I've found that the safest strategy is just to hang out here by the floor. All of the enemies should fly right over your head. And Firelord is another boss fight that is easier when you play aggressively. If you are short on weapon power-ups, orbs, or bombs, you should be able to get maxed out here in Reptile stage. There's an orb here, and these ducks will drop a bomb if you're quick. There's another bomb just hanging out here in the open, and the last of these 3 fish will drop another orb. In the second section, try not to get mesmerized by the background. These red capsules will drop more power-ups and another bomb. Whatever you do though, do not shoot the last capsule. It sucks. At the end of this piranha and pterodactyl infested river, you'll find Reptile riding his giant laser shooting dinosaur. That is so cool. With all 5 stages completed, Galactus will send you off to the final stage, the Magic Domain. This is, as you'd expect, the hardest stage in the game, with even faster, more aggressive enemies, and much more dangerous terrain. The first time I made it to this stage, it took all of my continues and almost all of my lives to make it to the end of the game. The next time I made it to the Magic Domain, however, I made it through all 3 sections without dying. I say this not to brag, but to reiterate how much easier the game becomes once you become familiar with the enemy patterns and stage layouts. But remember, just because I'm saying Silver Surfer isn't especially difficult does not mean that I'm saying it's easy. It has a much steeper learning curve than a game like Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, and it does demand your full attention, so you can't play this game with one hand and I don't know, scroll through Twitter on the other. But you can beat this game without too much trouble. It's quite liberal with its extra lives and continues, so there's no reason why you can't see the end screen after a few attempts. And I absolutely recommend that you try it, because Silver Surfer is actually a very good game, and definitely one of the better licensed games in the NES library. Now, as far as I could tell, the legend of this game's difficulty was propagated by a single person. So if you take anything from this video, I'd like it to be that you shouldn't base your judgments on what anyone else says. And that includes me, what do I know? So give it a try, and make up your own mind. Or don't. I mean, I'm not your dad. Okay, well I think I have just the game then. Tell me, do you like ninjas?